No me mates vaquero. La guerrera apache Prometió darle hijos fuertes. The wind whispered through the tall stalks, carrying with it the scent of dust and distant fires. A lone vaquero rode slowly along a narrow trail, his horse's hooves making soft thuds against the hard earth. He had been tracking a small group of Apache warriors for days, careful to leave no traces of his own passage. His eyes, sharp and cautious, scanned the horizon for any movement. He was a man used to the dangers of the frontier, where every step could mean life or death. As he moved closer to a ridge, he saw signs that the group had passed recently. Broken twigs, footprints pressed into the soil, and the faint glimmer of sunlight reflecting off metal objects left behind. He tightened his grip on the reins, his mind calculating the next move. He was alone, yes, but he had faced dangers before. Still, something about this trail made him wary. There was a sense of something different, something more dangerous than ordinary bandits or stray animals. From the ridge, he finally spotted them. A small band of Apache warriors moved swiftly and silently, their dark silhouettes blending with the terrain. Among them, a young woman stood out. She was not just another warrior. There was a fire in her eyes that could not be missed. Her posture was steady, her movements calculated, yet full of energy. She carried a bow across her back and a small knife at her hip. Her presence seemed almost impossible to ignore. Even from a distance, the vaquero could feel the strength and determination radiating from her. He slowed his horse, unsure of whether to approach or stay hidden. The woman noticed him immediately. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and in that instant the world seemed to shrink around them. She did not flinch, did not show fear. Instead, she held his gaze as if challenging him, daring him to act. The vaquero felt a mix of surprise and caution. She was brave, perhaps even fearless. Many men had underestimated Apache women before, but he knew better. He had heard stories, seen the results of underestimating those who were skilled, those who had lived through harsh lands and fierce battles. She was someone who had survived in ways many could not imagine. The vaquero dismounted slowly, his hands raised slightly in a gesture of truce, but his mind remained alert. The young woman did not attack. Instead, she raised her own hands, showing she was unarmed for the moment. Her voice, calm yet firm, reached him across the distance. "No me mates vaquero," she shouted, her tone both desperate and strong. "I am not your enemy, I only wish to live." Her words carried a strange weight, a mixture of defiance and hope. It was a plea, yes, but also a promise that she would not be easily broken. The vaquero studied her carefully. He could see the sweat on her brow, the dirt smeared across her face from travel and battle, the determination that burned in her eyes. She was young, but her spirit was old in wisdom and experience. There was a confidence in her stance that was unusual, even among the most seasoned warriors. He realized that killing her would not be simple, not only because she could defend herself, but because there was something about her that commanded respect. He felt an unfamiliar hesitation. She stepped closer, keeping her hands visible, her eyes never leaving his. "I promise you," she said, her voice softer now, almost like a whisper carried by the wind, "I will give life. I will give children who are strong and brave, children who will honor their people. Spare me, and I will honor that promise." Her words were strange, even to him. She spoke of the future, of generations yet to come, of hope and legacy in a world that was often cruel and unforgiving. The vaquero, despite himself, felt a tug of something he had not expected, an acknowledgement of humanity, of connection beyond the battlefield. The air between them was tense, filled with the sound of the wind and the occasional distant cry of a bird. The vaquero's mind raced. He had been trained to act quickly, to strike when opportunity presented itself. Yet here before him was someone who had survived countless dangers, someone who demanded recognition not just through words but through courage. He realized that any rash action could be his undoing. She was clever, skilled and fearless. He had to think carefully. Slowly he lowered his hands and took a step back. "I will not kill you," he said finally, his voice steady but quiet. "Not yet." The young woman's eyes widened slightly, a mixture of relief and disbelief. She had expected nothing less than death, yet here was the man who could have ended her life choosing not to. It was a moment that neither would forget. In the vast silence of the plains, a fragile truce was formed, one built on respect, observation, and the unspoken understanding that survival often required alliances, however temporary. As the sun climbed higher, casting its warm light over the land, the vaquero and the young Apache warrior began a cautious interaction. Words were exchanged, stories hinted at, and trust was tested with every passing minute. She spoke of her people, her family, the hardships they endured, and the pride she carried as a warrior. He spoke of his own journey, the struggles of the frontier, the loneliness and dangers that came with his way of life. Though they came from vastly different worlds, they found a strange understanding. Both knew what it meant to fight, to survive, and to protect what mattered most. Hours passed, and the tension slowly eased into a rhythm of cautious companionship. They were not friends, not yet, but they were no longer enemies in the moment. Each had something to learn from the other, lessons in courage, patience, and strategy. The young woman demonstrated her skill with her bow, not as a threat but as a demonstration of capability and trustworthiness. The vaquero observed, impressed by her precision, her calm under pressure, and her knowledge of the land. As the day wore on, the plains revealed both beauty and danger. Wild animals roamed the fields, and the wind shifted, carrying scents of distant fires and potential threats. The two travelers moved carefully, understanding that the world beyond the ridge was full of challenges neither could face alone. Yet, in this shared moment of survival, there was also the beginning of something more profound: respect. Respect for courage, for life, and for the choices that shaped each of them. By evening, the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. They found a small, sheltered area to rest, the first sign of safety they had encountered in days. The young Apache warrior gathered some wood and prepared a small fire, while the vaquero kept watch. Around the crackling flames, they continued to speak in quiet tones, exchanging more about their lives, hopes, and the uncertainties that lay ahead. There was an unspoken agreement that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, they were alive, and that was enough. In that moment, under the vast expanse of the sky, the vaquero could not help but marvel at the strength of this young woman who had, in mere hours, changed the course of his journey. She had faced him with courage when most would have fled, spoken with conviction when most would have begged silently, and survived through skill and determination. Her promise of strong children seemed symbolic, a reminder that life, resilience, and legacy were always possible, even in the harshest of worlds. As night fell and the stars began to dot the sky, the two settled into a wary but growing trust. The plains were quiet, but danger was never far away. Yet in that quiet night, a bond was formed, one of survival, respect, and the tentative hope that even in a world filled with conflict, courage and humanity could still shine through. The vaquero knew this encounter would remain with him forever, a memory of the warrior who had challenged everything he thought he knew about strength, honor, and life itself. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over the plains, painting the land in soft gold and orange hues. The vaquero stirred first, listening carefully to the quiet movements of the young Apache warrior. She was already awake, her eyes scanning the horizon with the sharp awareness of someone who had spent their entire life in the wild. He watched her for a moment, impressed by her alertness and calm. It was clear she had learned to survive in ways he could never have imagined. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. "We should move," he said quietly. She nodded, acknowledging his words without question. Though their alliance was fragile, it was functional. They had survived together through one day, but the frontier offered no guarantees for tomorrow. Danger lurked everywhere, from wild animals to hostile groups and the ever-present challenges of the land itself. They had to trust each other, at least enough to stay alive. As they traveled, their conversations grew slightly more relaxed. The Apache woman, whose name was Ahioka, shared small pieces of her life. She spoke of her village, nestled near the river, where her people had lived for generations. She described the ways of her community, the hunting, the dances, the stories passed down by elders, and the pride she felt in being part of it. The vaquero, whose name was Mateo, listened intently. He had lived among ranches and towns, but he had rarely encountered someone with such a deep connection to their people and land. Mateo began to share pieces of his own story, carefully, as he measured what to reveal. He spoke of life on the frontier, the constant challenges of survival, and the loneliness that often accompanied a life spent traveling alone. He described the dangers he had faced: wild animals, treacherous rivers, and hostile encounters with those who wished him harm. Ahioka listened quietly, her expression thoughtful. Though their worlds were different, they shared an understanding of struggle and perseverance. Both had learned to adapt, to face fear, and to rely on their own skills when no one else could be trusted. As the day wore on, they encountered the first real test of their uneasy alliance. A small group of bandits had set up camp along a nearby ridge, hoping to ambush travelers who crossed their path. Mateo spotted them first, crouching behind a low rise and signaling to Ahioka. Without hesitation, she moved with him, her steps silent and precise. Together, they circled the ridge, observing the bandits and planning their path. Neither spoke above a whisper, but there was a rhythm to their cooperation that surprised Mateo. Though he had once thought he could only rely on himself, he realized that working together with Ahioka made them stronger. The bandits did not see them as they passed. Ahioka's knowledge of the land proved invaluable. She knew where to step, how to avoid dry branches that could snap, and which paths offered the best cover. Mateo followed her lead, silently admiring her skills. He began to see her not just as a survivor but as a guide and a partner in navigating the dangers of the plains. By the time they were safely past the ridge, Mateo could not help but feel a growing respect for her. She had not only saved him from potential danger but had done so with courage and intelligence. As they continued their journey, the two encountered more natural challenges. The midday sun was harsh, and water sources were scarce. Ahioka knew where to find small streams and hidden pools, teaching Mateo to look for signs in the land, the bends in rivers, the tracks of animals, and the types of plants that grew in wet soil. He followed her instructions carefully, realizing that she possessed knowledge he could never have learned from books or towns. Survival, he understood, depended not just on strength but on understanding the world around you. By evening, they had covered many miles. They found a sheltered spot near a cluster of rocks and set up a small camp. Ahioka gathered wood for a fire while Mateo prepared a simple meal from dried meat he had carried. Around the flickering flames, they spoke more freely. Mateo asked Ahioka about her promise, the one she had made when she begged for her life. She explained that it was more than a promise of family. It was a promise of strength, resilience, and hope. She spoke of children who would inherit the courage of their people, who would grow to face life with wisdom and bravery. Mateo listened, intrigued. Her words were more than symbolic. They reflected a philosophy of life, one that valued perseverance and honor. Night fell, and the plains were quiet except for the occasional call of an owl or the distant howl of a coyote. Mateo kept watch while Ahioka rested, the fire casting long shadows across the rocky terrain. He thought about the day's events, the cooperation, the mutual reliance, and the small victories they had achieved together. he realized that his initial assumptions about her had been wrong. She was not simply a warrior pleading for her life. She was someone who could teach him about survival, respect, and the strength that comes from living in harmony with the land. The following days brought more challenges. They faced sudden storms, harsh winds, and treacherous terrain that tested their endurance. Mateo struggled at times, unsure of which paths to take or how to navigate the unpredictable land. Ahioka, however, remained calm and focused, her knowledge guiding them through each obstacle. When Mateo slipped on a wet slope, she was there to steady him. When he struggled to find safe drinking water, she directed him to hidden springs. Each challenge strengthened their partnership, forging a bond based on trust and shared experience. Along the way, they encountered signs of other groups, Apache scouts, settlers, and travelers. Ahioka taught Mateo how to read these signs: broken branches, footprints in the dirt, and smoke rising in the distance. He learned to be patient, to observe, and to anticipate danger before it arrived. Slowly, he began to rely on her instincts as much as his own. The initial hesitation he had felt toward her courage transformed into admiration. He began to see her as a person of extraordinary skill and character, someone who could survive the harshest conditions and yet maintain her humanity. One evening, as they rested near a quiet stream, Mateo asked about her life before the conflict that had driven her to the plains. Ahioka spoke of her family, her training, and the lessons she had learned from elders and warriors alike. She described the values she held dear: respect, honor, and the importance of protecting her people. Mateo listened carefully, realizing that her promise of strong children was tied to these values. It was a vision of continuity, of hope for the future, and a commitment to preserving what mattered most. As the days passed, the trust between them deepened. Mateo found himself relying on Ahioka not only for survival, but for insight into the world he had only seen through the lens of his own experience. She challenged his assumptions, taught him patience, and demonstrated courage in ways that inspired him. In turn, he offered his own skills, experience, and protection, creating a partnership that neither had anticipated. Though they came from different worlds, they discovered a common understanding rooted in respect, survival, and shared challenges. By the end of the week, they had traveled far from the ridge where they had first met. Their journey had tested their physical strength, their judgment, and their ability to trust one another. Yet through it all, they had learned to work together, to anticipate each other's needs, and to rely on mutual skill and courage. Mateo realized that sparing her life had led to an unexpected alliance, one that might change the course of both their futures. As the sun set on the horizon, painting the plains in brilliant shades of red and gold, Mateo and Ahioka set up camp once more. Around the fire, they reflected on the days behind them and the challenges yet to come. There was no certainty in the world they lived in, but there was a growing understanding between them, a recognition that survival depended on trust, cooperation, and respect. Ahioka's promise of strong children echoed in Mateo's mind, not as a literal plan, perhaps, but as a symbol of resilience, hope, and the legacy that people leave behind when they live with courage and honor. In the quiet of the night, as stars twinkled above, Mateo felt a shift within himself. The plains, once a solitary expanse of danger and survival, now seemed filled with possibilities. With Ahioka by his side, he understood that their journey was more than a fight to survive. It was a lesson in trust, courage, and the potential for connection in a world often defined by conflict. He knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for the first time, he was not facing them alone. The following morning, the sun rose bright and warm over the plains, though the wind carried a chill that hinted at the coming winter. Mateo and Ahioka moved carefully, their steps quiet but purposeful. The days spent together had created a rhythm between them, one of unspoken understanding. Mateo had learned to anticipate Ahioka's movements and decisions, and she, in turn, had grown to trust his instincts. Their journey was far from easy, yet each challenge seemed to draw them closer, weaving a bond that neither had expected when they first met. As they traveled, they encountered the evidence of other travelers, abandoned campsites, footprints of horses, and the occasional mark of someone passing through the land in search of food or safety. Ahioka taught Mateo how to read these signs, explaining that every detail in the wilderness carried meaning. She pointed out a broken branch and explained how it indicated a rider had passed in haste. She showed him tracks that belonged to a family of deer and how to follow them to find water or game. Mateo listened carefully, realizing that every lesson strengthened not only their chance of survival, but also their trust in one another. Their bond was tested when they came across a narrow canyon. The path was steep and rocky, with loose stones that threatened to shift underfoot. Mateo led the way cautiously, but Ahioka's guidance proved invaluable. She showed him safer footholds and helped steady his horse as they navigated the treacherous terrain. At one point, Mateo stumbled on a loose rock, and Ahioka's quick reflexes kept him from falling. He caught himself heart racing and looked at her with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. "You are faster than I imagined," he said, smiling faintly. She only nodded, her expression calm but alert. It was a small victory, but it reinforced the growing understanding that they could depend on each other. As they reached the bottom of the canyon, the sun was high overhead. The air was dry and hot, but Ahioka led Mateo to a hidden spring, shaded by rocks and trees. The water was cool and clear, a precious gift in the harsh landscape. They rested there, drinking and filling their canteens, and for a moment the world outside seemed distant. Mateo observed her quietly, noting the way her hands moved as she filled the water, the careful way she avoided disturbing the fragile plants around the spring. She was precise and thoughtful, even in small actions. He realized that her survival was not only about strength and skill, but also about patience, observation, and respect for the land. After a brief rest, they continued their journey, following a winding trail through the plains. Along the way, they came across a family of travelers, a small group of settlers moving slowly with their belongings and children. The settlers looked wary as Mateo and Ahioka approached, and for a moment, there was tension in the air. Mateo raised a hand in greeting, and Ahioka followed suit, showing that they meant no harm. Slowly, the settlers relaxed and offered them food and water in exchange for news of the surrounding area. Ahioka shared information about the paths ahead, while Mateo spoke cautiously of dangers they had observed. It was a rare moment of connection, bridging worlds that were often separated by fear and misunderstanding. As evening approached, they set up camp near a grove of trees, the fire crackling warmly in the cooling air. The conversation turned to stories of the past. Ahioka spoke of her childhood, of learning to hunt and track, of the elders who taught her the ways of her people, and of the responsibilities she bore as a warrior. Mateo shared tales of his travels, the people he had met, and the lessons he had learned from hardship. They discovered that, despite coming from very different worlds, they shared values: courage, loyalty, and the desire to protect those they cared about. Each story deepened their understanding of each other, and a quiet respect blossomed into something more profound, a sense of partnership that went beyond mere survival. The following days were not without danger. A sudden storm struck the plains, bringing heavy rain, strong winds, and the threat of flooding in low-lying areas. Mateo and Ahioka took shelter under a rocky outcrop, working together to keep dry and safe. The storm was fierce and the wind howled around them, rattling loose stones and bending trees. Yet, in the midst of the chaos, they remained calm, relying on each other's strength and knowledge. Ahioka demonstrated how to secure their belongings and create a small barrier to protect against the wind. Mateo followed her instructions, realizing that her experience and instincts were invaluable in moments of crisis. By the time the storm passed, they were exhausted but safe, a testament to their growing cooperation and trust. After the storm, the land appeared transformed. The plains were slick with rain, streams swelled, and the air was filled with the scent of wet earth and growing plants. Mateo and Ahioka continued their journey, adjusting to the changes in the environment. They encountered small groups of animals, signs of other travelers, and remnants of abandoned camps. Each observation required careful analysis and quick decision-making. Mateo began to notice how naturally Ahioka adapted to each new situation, her movements fluid and confident. He realized that she had lived her life in constant preparation for challenges, and her skills were a reflection of both training and instinct. He felt admiration growing alongside respect. One afternoon, while navigating a rocky ridge, Mateo injured his ankle slightly, twisting it on a loose stone. Pain shot through his leg and he sat down immediately. Ahioka knelt beside him, examining the injury carefully. She wrapped his ankle with strips of cloth she carried and helped him stand, offering her arm for support. "You must be more careful," she said, her tone gentle but firm. Mateo nodded, grateful for her care. The experience reminded him that their journey required not only physical skill, but also cooperation, patience, and compassion. It was a lesson he would not forget. As they moved through a narrow valley, Ahioka noticed signs of another group of travelers, a small band of scouts passing through. She guided Mateo to a hidden spot behind some bushes, allowing them to observe without being seen. The scouts passed by without noticing them, and Mateo marveled at her skill in reading subtle signs and anticipating movements. He realized that her abilities were not simply physical but also mental, a combination of observation, experience, and intelligence. She had survived in this harsh land not by chance, but by mastery of every detail around her. Mateo began to see her as more than a warrior. She was a teacher, a guide, and a partner in every sense. Nightfall came again, and they set up camp in a sheltered area near a small grove of trees. The fire crackled warmly, casting dancing shadows on their faces. They ate a simple meal of dried meat and gathered water, and then settled down to rest. As Mateo watched the stars twinkle above, he reflected on the journey so far. He thought about the dangers they had faced, the lessons he had learned, and the trust that had grown between them. Ahioka's promise of strong children echoed in his mind, not as a literal plan, perhaps, but as a symbol of courage, resilience, and the legacy that comes from facing life with determination and honor. In the quiet moments before sleep, Mateo and Ahioka shared stories and thoughts about the future. They spoke of hopes, fears, and the unknown challenges ahead. Mateo realized that, although their paths had crossed under circumstances of tension and danger, they had created something meaningful together. A partnership built on trust, respect, and shared experience. Each day had strengthened their bond, teaching them that survival was not just about skill or strength, but about understanding, cooperation, and the willingness to face challenges together. By the time the moon rose high in the sky, casting its silvery light over the plains, Mateo felt a sense of calm and purpose. He had learned to trust Ahioka completely, to rely on her instincts, and to appreciate her strength and wisdom. She had in turn begun to trust him, recognizing his courage, resourcefulness, and loyalty. Their journey was far from over, but they had proven to themselves that they could face the dangers of the frontier together. In each other, they had found not only an ally but a companion, someone who understood the hardships of life and the value of perseverance. As the night deepened and the fire's glow faded, they lay in their small shelter, listening to the gentle sounds of the plains, the rustle of grass, the distant call of animals and the whisper of the wind. Mateo thought about the lessons of the past days: patience, observation, trust, and courage. He realized that their journey was not only a test of survival, but also a journey of growth and understanding. Ahioka's presence had transformed his perspective, teaching him that true strength came from more than physical skill. It came from wisdom, resilience, and the bonds we form with others. With the first light of dawn approaching, Mateo closed his eyes, feeling a sense of hope and determination. He knew that more challenges awaited them, but he also knew that they were stronger together. Ahioka's guidance, courage, and insight had already shaped the course of their journey, and he was grateful for her presence. In the vast, unpredictable plains, they had found not only survival but connection, trust, and the promise of what could come from facing life's trials together. The following morning, the plains were quiet, bathed in a soft light that promised a clear day ahead. Mateo and Ahioka had grown accustomed to traveling together, each learning the other's rhythms and instincts. Yet, despite their growing trust, the challenges of the frontier were far from over. The vast expanse of land that stretched before them was filled with dangers: rival groups, unpredictable weather, and the ever-present risk of wild animals. They had survived so far because of their cooperation, but both knew that the future could test them in ways they had never imagined. As they followed a winding trail along a river, Ahioka paused and signaled Mateo to stop. Her sharp eyes had noticed a distant movement near a cluster of trees. She whispered, pointing toward the horizon, and Mateo squinted to see what she had seen. A small group of riders approached, moving quickly but with purpose. They did not appear friendly. Mateo's heart tightened. He had encountered hostile groups before, but Ahioka's calm demeanor reminded him to assess before reacting. They hid behind a low rise, watching as the riders came closer. Ahioka studied them carefully. "They are scouts," she said quietly. "Not here to fight yet, but they are searching. If they see us, it could lead to trouble." Mateo nodded, feeling the tension in his chest. He had faced danger alone many times, but now he realized how much he relied on Ahioka's knowledge and instincts. Her understanding of the land and its people gave them a chance to avoid conflict, something he would not have had on his own. Ahioka guided Mateo along a hidden path that ran parallel to the river, keeping them out of sight. They moved silently, stepping over rocks and roots, avoiding the dry twigs that could snap and give them away. Mateo followed her lead, careful to match her pace and trust her judgment. The scouts passed by without noticing them, and Mateo let out a quiet sigh of relief. "Your eyes are better than mine," he said with a small smile. She only nodded, her expression serious but composed. He realized that her skills were not just physical, but also mental. Observation, anticipation, and strategy combined in a way that made her an exceptional guide and companion. As they continued, Mateo noticed subtle signs that another challenge awaited them. Tracks in the dirt suggested that a group of people had recently traveled through the area, perhaps a rival band or settlers who had inadvertently caused tension with local communities. Ahioka studied the tracks carefully, her fingers tracing the impressions in the soil. "We must choose our path wisely," she said. "Some directions are safe, others could lead to conflict." Mateo realized that every step they took carried weight. The frontier was unforgiving and mistakes could be costly. By midday, they reached a small clearing near a grove of trees. Ahioka suggested they rest and eat before continuing, and Mateo agreed. As they shared a simple meal of dried meat and water, they talked quietly about the challenges ahead. Ahioka spoke of her people and the responsibilities she carried as a warrior. She explained that loyalty to her community was not just a duty but a guiding principle, shaping every decision she made. Mateo listened, reflecting on his own life, which had often been guided by survival rather than duty. He began to understand the depth of her commitment, not just to herself, but to the legacy of her people. Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden sound, a rustling in the bushes nearby. Both reached instinctively for their weapons, but it was only a lone traveler, a young man carrying supplies. He looked frightened and lost, and Ahioka approached cautiously. "Who are you?" she asked. The young man explained that he had become separated from his group and was seeking shelter and guidance. Ahioka and Mateo exchanged a glance, recognizing both the danger and the opportunity. Helping him could slow them down, but leaving him could lead to harm. They decided to offer assistance, guiding him to a safer path while keeping him out of sight from potential threats. As the day progressed, their journey became more physically demanding. The terrain grew rocky and uneven, and the sun blazed overhead, draining their energy. Mateo's legs ached from the long hours on horseback, and Ahioka's focus remained sharp, guiding them safely through the difficult paths. They encountered streams and small rivers, some of which required careful navigation to avoid losing footing or damaging supplies. Ahioka demonstrated remarkable skill in reading the terrain, identifying safe crossings, and showing Mateo how to balance caution with efficiency. By late afternoon, Mateo and Ahioka reached the edge of a dense forest. It offered shelter from the harsh sun and a chance to rest, but it also carried hidden dangers, wild animals, hidden obstacles, and the possibility of encountering hostile groups. Ahioka studied the forest carefully, noting the safest path to take and the areas to avoid. Mateo followed her guidance, relying on her expertise. The forest tested their coordination and trust, requiring them to move in sync, anticipate each other's actions, and maintain vigilance at all times. As night fell, they found a small clearing to set up camp. The fire they built cast dancing shadows on the trees, creating a sense of warmth and safety in an otherwise uncertain world. Around the fire, they shared stories and reflections. Ahioka spoke of her promise, the one she had made when they first met. She explained that her vision of strong children was not only about family, but also about the values and strength passed down from one generation to the next. Mateo listened thoughtfully, realizing that her promise represented hope, resilience, and continuity in a world often defined by conflict and survival. Their conversation was interrupted by distant voices, carried by the wind. Mateo's heart raced as he realized that the forest was not as empty as they had hoped. Ahioka's eyes narrowed, and she signaled him to be quiet. They listened carefully, identifying the voices as part of a small scouting party, likely searching for travelers or intruders. Ahioka guided Mateo to a hidden spot behind a thicket of trees, keeping them out of sight. Mateo marveled at her ability to anticipate danger and respond without panic. Her skills had become a lifeline, ensuring that they remained safe even in potentially threatening situations. The scouts passed without noticing them, and Mateo exhaled a quiet sigh of relief. "Your instincts are remarkable," he said, admiration clear in his voice. Ahioka only nodded, her expression calm but focused. She knew that the frontier demanded constant vigilance, and that every moment of carelessness could lead to danger. Mateo realized that he had learned more in these days traveling with her than in years of facing the wilderness alone. Her guidance, courage, and insight had shaped their journey, helping them navigate challenges that would have been insurmountable on his own. As the night deepened, they sat near the fire, reflecting on the days behind them and the challenges yet to come. Mateo thought about the bond they had formed, one of trust, respect, and reliance. He realized that their partnership had grown stronger through shared struggle, mutual protection, and the acknowledgement of each other's abilities. Ahioka's courage and skill had taught him lessons about observation, patience, and the value of working together. In turn, he had demonstrated his own resilience, loyalty, and determination, showing her that he could be relied upon even in the most difficult circumstances. By the early hours of morning, the forest grew quiet, and a sense of calm settled over the clearing. Mateo and Ahioka prepared to continue their journey, knowing that new challenges awaited them beyond the trees. Yet, for the first time, they felt a deep confidence in their ability to face the unknown. They had survived storms, navigated dangerous terrain, avoided hostile scouts, and learned to trust each other completely. Their journey had transformed from a simple fight for survival into a shared adventure, filled with lessons, growth, and the beginnings of a partnership that neither could have anticipated when they first met. As dawn broke, painting the forest in soft gold, Mateo and Ahioka mounted their horses and continued along the path. The air was crisp, filled with the sounds of birds and the distant rush of a river. Each step forward was a testament to their resilience and cooperation. The bond between them, forged through adversity and strengthened by trust, carried them forward. Mateo reflected on the lessons he had learned. Courage was not just physical strength. Survival depended on knowledge and observation, and true partnerships could transform the harshest challenges into opportunities for growth and understanding. By midday, they reached the edge of the forest, the plain stretching out before them once again. Mateo felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that with Ahioka by his side, they could face whatever lay ahead. Her promise of strong children, of hope, resilience, and legacy echoed in his mind, symbolizing not only her vision for the future, but also the strength they had already cultivated together. As they rode forward, the wind carrying the scent of grass and earth, Mateo understood that their journey was far from over. Yet he also knew that they were stronger together, ready to face the next chapter of their story with courage, wisdom, and unwavering trust. The sun rose slowly over the plains, casting long shadows across the rolling hills. Mateo and Ahioka had traveled far since their first encounter, and the land they moved through felt both familiar and new. Their journey had tested them in countless ways, physically, mentally, and emotionally, but they had survived together, learning from each other and growing stronger with each challenge. As they rode side by side, there was a quiet understanding between them, a bond forged not by words alone, but by shared experience and trust. The morning was calm, but both knew the frontier held surprises. Ahioka scanned the horizon with her sharp eyes, noting subtle changes in the landscape. Mateo followed her lead, trusting her instincts as he had learned to do over the past weeks. They were no longer just traveling together. They were partners in navigating the unpredictable land, each relying on the other's strengths and wisdom. Mateo had come to respect her not only as a warrior, but as a teacher, guide, and friend. And Ahioka had learned to rely on his courage, experience, and judgment, appreciating the stability he brought to their partnership. By midday, they reached a river that sparkled under the sun's rays. The water was clear and inviting, a chance to rest and refresh after days of travel. Ahioka led Mateo to a safe crossing point, teaching him to gauge the depth and current before stepping in. Mateo followed her instructions carefully, recognizing how much he had learned from her guidance. They paused to drink and refill their canteens, sharing a quiet moment of peace. It was a rare reprieve in a journey that had been filled with danger, uncertainty, and constant movement. As they rested, Mateo reflected on the lessons they had learned together. He thought of the first day he had encountered Ahioka, when her courage and determination had forced him to see her not as a threat, but as a remarkable person in her own right. He remembered the moments of fear, the challenges of navigating harsh terrain, and the countless situations where their lives had depended on each other. Each experience had built a deep respect and trust between them, transforming what had begun as a tense meeting into a meaningful partnership. Their peace was soon interrupted by distant sounds, a group of riders approaching across the plains. Mateo and Ahioka exchanged a glance, their shared history giving them confidence in facing new challenges. Ahioka whispered instructions, and they moved to a hidden position, observing the riders carefully. It was a small group of travelers, not hostile but weary and in need of guidance. Mateo and Ahioka decided to offer assistance, knowing that helping others was part of their journey and their shared values. They approached cautiously, offering water and advice on safe paths to follow. The travelers expressed gratitude, and the encounter reinforced the importance of cooperation, empathy, and support in a harsh world. As the sun climbed higher, they continued their journey, the plain stretching endlessly before them. Mateo marveled at Ahioka's ability to navigate the land with precision and care. She taught him to read the signs of animals, weather, and terrain, skills he had once thought unnecessary but now realized were vital to survival. Each day spent together strengthened not only their physical skills, but also their understanding of the world and each other. Mateo felt a deep sense of admiration for her resilience, intelligence, and unwavering commitment to her people and principles. By afternoon, they reached a small valley surrounded by hills. The valley offered shelter, water, and a chance to rest before continuing onward. They set up a small camp, gathering wood for a fire and preparing a simple meal. As they sat by the fire, Mateo and Ahioka shared stories of their past, reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. Ahioka spoke of her promise, her vision of strong children, not just in a literal sense, but as a symbol of hope, resilience, and the continuation of values and courage. Mateo listened carefully, realizing that her promise represented not only her strength, but also the lessons they had learned together. The night fell quietly, the stars appearing one by one in the dark sky. Mateo kept watch while Ahioka rested, thinking about the bond they had formed. Their journey had taught him that true strength came from more than physical skill. It came from knowledge, patience, empathy, and trust. Ahioka's guidance had helped him grow in ways he had never expected, and he felt grateful for the partnership they had built. In the quiet night, he realized that their journey was not only about survival, but about learning, growth, and the possibility of something lasting beyond the immediate dangers of the frontier. Over the next days, Mateo and Ahioka faced more challenges, crossing difficult terrain, navigating sudden storms, and avoiding potential dangers. Each obstacle tested their patience, skills, and cooperation, but they faced every challenge together. Mateo relied on Ahioka's instincts, and she relied on his experience and determination. Their partnership had become seamless, a dance of mutual understanding and respect. Each day reinforced the idea that their survival was not just about individual strength, but about the connection and trust they had built between them. As they traveled, Mateo began to notice subtle changes in himself. He was no longer simply surviving. He was learning, growing, and appreciating the world in ways he had never before experienced. Ahioka's influence had opened his eyes to the value of observation, patience, and careful planning. He admired her resilience, her intelligence, and her courage, and he realized that their journey had transformed him. He had become more aware, more thoughtful, and more attuned to the world around him. Their experiences together had not only shaped his survival skills, but also his perspective on life and human connection. By the time they reached a small hill overlooking the plains, the sun was setting, painting the sky with shades of orange, pink, and gold. Mateo and Ahioka paused to take in the view, reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. The plains stretched endlessly, a symbol of both freedom and challenge. Mateo thought about the early days, when he had encountered Ahioka as a warrior pleading for her life, and he marveled at how far they had come. The trust, respect, and cooperation they had developed were the foundation of something enduring, something that transcended fear, danger, and the uncertainties of the frontier. As night fell, they set up camp once more, the fire casting a warm glow on their faces. Around the flames, they spoke quietly, sharing thoughts, reflections, and hopes for the future. Mateo realized that Ahioka's promise of strong children was more than a metaphor. It was a representation of resilience, courage, and the values they carried forward. Together, they had faced the challenges of the frontier and had grown stronger, wiser, and more connected. Their journey had taught them that survival was not only about skill, but also about partnership, trust, and the ability to see beyond immediate danger to the possibilities of hope and legacy. In the stillness of the night, Mateo and Ahioka reflected on their journey. They thought about the storms they had endured, the dangers they had avoided, and the lessons they had learned from one another. Mateo recognized the transformation in himself, understanding that his strength had been enhanced by knowledge, patience, and the guidance of a remarkable companion. Ahioka recognized the reliability, courage, and insight Mateo brought to their journey. Together they had formed a bond that went beyond survival, a bond of respect, partnership, and shared growth. As dawn approached, the plains were bathed in the first light of day, soft and golden. Mateo and Ahioka prepared to continue, knowing that the future would bring more challenges, but also opportunities for growth and understanding. Their journey had proven that true strength came from cooperation, trust, and mutual respect. Each obstacle they had faced together had reinforced their ability to navigate life's uncertainties with courage and wisdom. They had learned that survival was not only about enduring hardships, but also about embracing lessons, forming meaningful connections, and carrying forward hope for the future. As they rode across the plains, Mateo felt a sense of peace and purpose. The journey with Ahioka had taught him about resilience, courage, and the importance of trust and partnership. He realized that her promise of strong children was a symbol of the values they had cultivated together: strength, wisdom, empathy, and hope. Ahioka, in turn, reflected on the journey that had brought her from fear to trust, from isolation to partnership. Together, they had navigated the dangers of the frontier and had emerged stronger, wiser, and more connected than ever before. By the end of their journey, Mateo and Ahioka had not only survived the harsh lands but had grown in ways neither could have anticipated. Their bond, forged through shared challenges and mutual trust, had become a testament to the power of cooperation, respect, and resilience. As they looked out over the plains, they understood that their journey was more than a story of survival. It was a story of growth, connection, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. In that quiet moment, as the wind whispered through the grasses and the sun dipped low in the sky, Mateo and Ahioka felt a profound sense of accomplishment. They had faced danger, learned from one another, and built a partnership that would endure in memory and in spirit. Their journey had been long and difficult, but it had shaped them into stronger, wiser individuals, capable of facing the future with courage, hope, and a shared understanding of what it meant to truly survive and thrive.